Broadcasting from an undisclosed location, which may or may not be a bedroom converted into a recording studio. I'm Rex Overdrive, back with another edition of Abominations in Technicolor. This show is brought to you by the fine folks over at Audible. Head on over to audibletrial.com/abominations and sign up for a free 30-day trial membership. Over 100,000 titles to choose from, and you can cancel anytime. That's audibletrial.com/abominations, and it directly supports the show. Now joining me as always is Adam. How's it going, Adam?
Hey, another week, another delicious movie for our enjoyment, for our pleasures.
A tasty morsel.
Oh, delicious morsel this week. I'm super excited about this one.
Well, in this time, it sort of directly ties into a movie that's coming out this weekend, Creed 2.
Yeah.
Very excited to check out Creed 2. I don't know if it's going to be as good as that first one. That first one is really good. And going into that one, I was kind of like, are you kidding me? They're going to make a movie about Apollo Creed's kid who was never even in any of the previous Rocky movies.
Right.
Apollo didn't even know about this kid, apparently. So
yeah, I didn't have any expectations for that. Well, I had low expectations for that movie, but it was a pleasant surprise. I mean, I think it's just like the nostalgia of Rocky, just kind of like the foundation that it's built with all of those movies, like 1 through 4. We'll talk about some of the way we try to rank these movies a little bit later, but there's something to that emotionally, at least for me, it gave me a foundation that allowed me to enjoy Creed so much more. And I really like that. I'm looking forward to the new one. Isn't it gonna not just because of the whole connection with Apollo, but like, doesn't this one also have a Drago connection as well?
Yeah, I mean, Dolph Lundgren's even in Creed 2. It's got the whole
God.
Drago's son is going to fight Adonis Creed. So it's like
it's pretty on the nose.
Yeah, us reviewing Rocky 4 is the perfect.
It's perfect, yeah.
Leading up to Creed 2. So we'll see how much Creed 2 actually dives into the Rocky 4 lore, I guess. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to Creed or Creed 2, I guess. I don't know much about the director who's doing this one, but the previous Creed movie, you had Ryan Coogler, who then went on to do Black Panther, and now he's doing Black Panther 2. But he's a producer on Creed 2, so hopefully like the script and all of that stuff. And you have good actors in there.
Right.
I think the guy who's playing Drago's son, I believe he's a fighter. He doesn't even have any acting experience. So it does go hand in hand with Rocky 4, I guess. So we'll see how that turns out. But I'm hoping the fight scenes in the film are top notch. So
yeah,
we'll see. But one thing I do want to mention is we want you guys to go ahead and give us a ranking and review on your podcast app. If you're listening to us on an iPhone or iPad or whatever, head on over to that iPhone Apple Podcast app and leave a ranking and a short review, 5 stars preferably, but that lets us show up in the search rankings and allows more people to hear us. But one thing I do want to but just mention real quick is everyone should head on over to Netflix and watch The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. Adam, I know you watched a little bit of it, but
yeah, I have to finish. I was about halfway through. Oh man, interesting. I mean, it's pretty out there. It's a Coen Brothers movie, so you got to kind of like know what you're getting into. But I really enjoyed it. I was a big fan of like Django Unchained, that Tarantino movie from a few years back, and I get a little bit of that like humorous Western flavor with, they don't pull any punches as far as violence and where it can go in this movie. But the beginning, at least, the stuff with Buster Scruggs in it, like that stuff was so great. Slowed down toward the middle a little bit with the Liam Neeson stuff, but very, very fresh movie. You know, like if you're looking for something new and different to watch, if you've been maybe binging a series or something and you're looking for something new, I would check it out just to get a, palate cleanser. We use that term a lot on the show, but it was kind of cool to get into something that's just totally different. And I liked what I saw of it as far as I got into it. I started it late at night and then I sadly fell asleep, which probably happens to a lot of us, but yeah, I will get back on the horse.
Well, especially when you have an 18-month-old.
Yeah, that doesn't help.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. Like, and for me, I do agree with you as far as like the middle. It sort of does really slow down, but pretty much like if you're somebody who has no idea what we're talking about, this is a movie directed by the Coen brothers. They've done a lot of great stuff. Like No Country for Old Men is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Burn After Reading.
Yeah. The Fargo came out in the mid-90s. That's an excellent film. But it's essentially just like a collection of stories. And it just, it'll spend like 10, 15 minutes on, one set of characters and tell a story and then move on to the other. But it's just a really great collection of stories that just has like humor, violence, and just this like quirky like Western tone, and it just really works well all together. And it's really entertaining, and like you said, it does feel like fresh. And I know we've seen Tarantino step into the waters with that, with Django Unchained and The Hateful Eight even, but
yeah, Hateful Eight, yeah.
I could definitely just go for more of this style. And, it's kind of sad seeing like the Western genre it's really dried up. Like there's hardly any, larger films being made in the Western genre. I mean, you had like, The Magnificent Seven was a high profile one that came out, I think a little over a year ago. But it's like anything, it's popular for a while, then it just sort of dies out. We might see that with comic book movies in 15, 20 years or so. So yeah. We'll see. But I urge you to, take a minute from your Daredevil Netflix series or whatever the hell you're watching that, we've seen that superhero stuff all the time. So take a minute and watch a great Western, and enjoy it and soak up the flavor. But yeah, there's some really good stuff being put on Netflix lately. I've been enjoying one. There's one I was watching last night. I forgot what it was called, but it's a tank documentary series. And there's some fascinating stuff in there. So I thought that was pretty cool. But I think we can move on to our main topic of the discussion on this week's episode, and we're going to be getting into Rocky IV.
And now our feature presentation.
Today, the Soviet Union has officially entered professional boxing.
This is not just an exhibition fight. Look, this is us against them.
He would like to compete against anyone who is qualified.
Drago is the most perfectly trained athlete ever. Whatever he hits, he destroys.
He could have stopped the fight. He could have saved his best friend's life.
I'll never forget you, Pop.
But now, the one thing he can't do is walk away.
Has the fight date been set yet?
December 25th.
Where?
It's in Russia.
Are you nuts? Miss Balboa, when will you be going to Russia?
I'm not going to Russia. I don't know what you're talking about.
He's had one professional fight, and one man is dead.
To baby, he's going to have to kill me.
What? Why can't you change your thinking?
Because I'm a fighter.
You can't win!
I must break you.
Rocky IV.
Now, what could be more epic than that?
Yeah,
come on.
That's just fantastic. Like, if that doesn't get you in the mood to watch a goddamn Rocky movie, I don't know what will.
Oh, man. Rocky IV, 1985, kind of the tail end of the Cold War era. This movie really kind of put Rocky on an international level. I mean, the stakes have never been higher with a Rocky movie. We're talking nation versus nation, life versus death. You know, it's really such a large scale, and so much. He has so much to lose at this point. So, you know, if you're a fan of Rocky 1, 2, and 3, I mean, to get to Rocky 4 to this point, it really is building and building. So, I mean, with that, this movie performed actually very well. And a lot of the movies we've covered on the podcast, we've talked about, you know, I always reference Fear and Loathing. That's like my standard, or my like floor. Like, everybody's got to be at least as high as, what was it, 10 million or something abominable, you know. But this movie did 128 domestic, 300 million worldwide. It was like 172 or something like that, or 100, yeah, something like that. 100.
Which it made more, a little bit more, just a couple $1 million than Rocky 3, but that's still really impressive, because with sequels, usually the first movie will be a massive hit.
Right.
And
right.
if you look at the first Rocky movie, that made like $117 million domestic, and then Rocky 2 made $85 million domestic. So that came down, you know, a decent amount. And then, you know, Rocky 3 and Rocky 4 went up even more. So,
yeah, and I mean, we're talking a difference in, you know, nearly a decade between Rocky 1 and Rocky 4. So, I mean, there's a little bit of inflation and things like that, economic impact as well, but not, you know, I look at this movie and I think, like, there's a reason they made the fourth one, and it's because people wanted more Rocky movies. You know what I mean? Like, I can't think of any other franchise where it goes that deep. I mean, it we'll talk about where it goes as we go to 5 and on, but I think that this movie people wanted it, and they came to the theaters and they saw it. But on the other hand, you pull up Rotten Tomatoes like we always do, and I see a green splatter on that thing, like 38% tomato meter, with, you know, contradicting 79% audience score. So, I mean, what can you infer from looking at numbers like that? Like, to me, that doesn't really make sense. Like, who's making up this 38% on this Rocky IV movie?
Well, 38% would be people or critics who gave it a positive review. So it would be, you know, what would that be? 62?
62%. Negative.
Yeah, 62% of critics didn't like the movie, and I guess I can sort of see why. The previous Rocky movies, yeah, they all had the epic boxing sequences and the training and all of that. But Rocky 4 is a little bit different of a beast.
It is.
Rocky 4 is sort of a product of its time. We're talking the mid-'80s here, ladies and gentlemen. Now,
what year was that again?
What, 85?
85.
Yeah, so we're smack dab.
The greatest year in cinematic history.
That's true. You have Back to the Future. What else was in 85? Teen Wolf.
Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Teen Wolf.
Dude, 1985 is one of the most amazing years in film history. At least for us on this podcast.
I know. It makes up about 30% of all
of our episodes.
Podcast episodes are in 85 for whatever reason. It's just coincidental, but maybe there is some rhyme and reason into why. But yeah, it's a product of its time. And I think the writers and, just the filmmakers, took that and maybe they wanted to make something a little bit different. It's the fourth film in the franchise. Rocky's on top. Like, where else do you go? Right. I think Rocky 4, they sort of, let's try this, something a little bit different here and take Rocky international.
Yeah, I think it works too. What do you remember, like, your first experience with? It doesn't necessarily have to be Rocky 4, but the Rocky franchise.
Well, I mean, for the both of us, our dad was a big fan of the Rocky movies, and some of my earliest memories of any of the Rocky films. And they're all sort of, I feel like I watched them all around the same time. And I think why that might sort of be is that, like, TNT or like Spike TV, they were always running those marathons.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's where I got a lot of watch time with these Rocky movies, is all of those like weekend Rocky marathons. Like on a Saturday or Sunday, they'd be playing Rocky 1 through 4 all day long, and that's where I'd watch it.
Yeah, I remember being probably 10 or so years old, and it was late at night, and I was watching TV, and it kind of rolled the opening, not credits, but just like the opening sequence, and you hear that fanfare playing, and the text scrolls across the screen left to right, Rocky in huge print, and I was just kind of like waiting, like, what number is it? Because I was aware of the fact that at that point, I think there were probably, I don't know if 5 was out or not, but probably was. But I was so excited. I think that one was, at the time, was 3 or something like that. But I just like those movies were just so like amazing to me, like just because of the character, and I just loved the music, and I don't know, there's just something about them, that at least the first 4, that I think they're just all like, they all play into each other really well, and they're each kind of unique in their own way. The first 2 I'd kind of put together like a part 1 and part 2.
Yeah, I agree.
And 3 and 4 are just kind of like extra ingredients on the pizza. It's like, you know what I mean? Like a pepperoni pizza, Rocky 1 and 2 is good and everything, but like doing like a 3 and 4 is just like adding those extra ingredients on there. You know what I mean? It's just like really making it all kind of just come together a little bit more and mix it up a little bit. But yeah, I do dig Rocky 4. I'd agree to your point that it's a product of its time, whether that be the music or the content with the Civil War in the the script and that kind of thing, like, the cars they drive. And I mean, it's a little dated, but in such a wonderful way. Like, the 80s was such a cool time period. So it really just gives you a full-blown, sample of 1980s flavor.
Yeah. And I mean, I wasn't even born during this time period when this movie came out, nor did I, see it in theaters, obviously. But like, if somebody was to ask me, what are some quintessential 80s movies, and movies that sort of, what's the word? Encapsulates the decade, I would put Rocky IV on that list. Oh yeah. It just oozes and resonates the 80s, and it's, it has the cars, it has the clothes. Rocky's rocking a 80s like yuppie sweater in the beginning of the movie. Right. And then you have Paulie's robot, which we're using the characters music in our podcast,
right?
Show. So yeah, I just think Rocky IV is a quintessential 80s movie, regardless if there's script issues and there's not that much character development. I think it's just a fantastic 80s movie that just brings you back to that decade. And I think it's a great time. Like, I'll always love Rocky IV.
Yeah. Well, we got some other friends of ours who we haven't had on the podcast in a little bit, and they weighed in on Rocky IV back in '85 as well. So let's see what our boys Siskel and Ebert have to say about Rocky IV.
I'm Gene Siskel, film critic of the Chicago Tribune.
And I'm Roger Ebert, film critic of the Chicago Sun-Times.
As most everyone knows by now, in Rocky IV, Rocky Balboa, the working man's hero, fights a machine-like Russian champion named Ivan Drago. How tough is Drago? This tough.
And shall we have a demonstration? Please do. Thank you. A normal heavyweight averages 700 pounds of pressure per square inch. Drago averages 1,850 pounds. But that's so the result quite obvious. And what results are those? Whatever he hits, he destroys.
Now, this may surprise you, but I really like Rocky IV a lot.
That does surprise me.
Well, then I'm going to be amazed at you. Let me explain why. Okay. I knew what was going to happen in this picture. I mean, everyone knows what's going to happen in this picture, yet I got caught up in both of its fights. I even got a little bit caught up. This is almost embarrassing to admit. In the 15th round of that fight, I thought somebody's going to play a trick on me. I got caught up in it. I enjoyed Rocky's brief moments with his wife and his son, which I had wanted in Rocky III and didn't get enough of. In fact, my only complaint is that there weren't enough of those scenes in this Rocky IV. The original Rocky worked because of its love story, I think, as well as its boxing. And Stallone, the writer and director, has de-emphasized the love angle throughout all of the series, and to their detriment. But what he does know how to do, and this is what makes this film work, is create a great, colorful villain. First, the brash Apollo Creed in #1. Then, Rocky II, my favorite, the villain was really Rocky himself, his overblown ego. Then in Rocky III, that mad dog, Clubber Lang, played by Mr. T. Now, even Drago, well played by the Adonis-like Dolph Lundgren. He's a great villain, and we sit back there and enjoy the film. It's a great hour and a half to eat popcorn by, and I want more, because he can make another great villain. I want Rocky V.
I don't want Rocky V. Please don't give me Rocky V. I thought
you'd rather have Halloween 5.
I wouldn't rather have Halloween 5, and I don't want Friday the 13th 5. What I'm amazed about is that you wanted Rocky IV. This movie is the bottom of the barrel. At the beginning, the first half hour,
Every scene is obligatory. He has to check in with Adrian. He has to talk to his brother-in-law. Here's little Rocky Jr. What would you have him do? Meet a whole bunch of new people? Well, I think that would be interesting. Yes, as a matter of fact. He had a great idea in 1976 and made a great movie based on that idea about a real human being named Rocky Balboa and his touching love affair with this girl. Now Balboa has turned into this egotistical monster who takes over the entire movie. The other little people in his life have their run-ons. Then there's the fight at the one-third mark where somebody loses, and the fight is the two-third mark. Okay, Rocky. This movie is absolutely formula. It is predictable. It is uninspired, and it is not exciting. And even the fight at the end, which usually works for me, didn't work this time. Roger, you like some of the others in the series too, so they've been formula. As a matter of fact, and you knew exactly what's going to happen then. That's right. And I'm telling you that this time, this villain, we've complained about Clint Eastwood not coming up with great villains. We've complained with the James Bond series not coming up with great villains. It's a common flaw. Let me ask you one question. Tell me, is even Drago a good villain or a bad villain? Let me answer that one first. He's a moderately interesting villain, but let me ask you an even better question. How come he never has a single scene alone with his wife? The woman who does all of his speaking for him. How come she's such a big character and has 9 times more dialogue than he has? Because he's supposed to be stolid and the tough Russian. Maybe he punched, she talked. Maybe it's because she's played by Stallone's girlfriend. I think she did a nice job. Because I think if he'd been allowed to take over all of that dialogue and be more of a character, it would have been a lot better than him sitting there silently while Bridget Nielsen has all of the best lines. I don't think so. You don't think so? Well, I do think so. As I said, he punched, she talked.
Wow. Man. Unexpected.
Totally.
Our boy Ebert, we have a changing of the sides here. Switcheroo.
Yeah.
Normally, for anybody that has listened to the podcast, you know, in many of our episodes where we use Siskel and Ebert, normally our opinions tend to be in line with on the side of Roger Ebert. But in this case, he seems to have some of his own ideas about what this movie should have been, even though he claims he didn't even want it in the first place.
Yeah, and the funny thing about listening back to this is that those guys said they didn't want a Halloween 5 and a Friday the 13th 5.
Right.
Those things actually happened. So it's
long
sort
gone.
of fun to, hear that back.
I did agree with them about not wanting Rocky 5 though. I thought that was pretty funny. It's like, we could have just skipped that one maybe, but
right.
Yeah, I don't know. I would agree with everything about Ivan Drago being a good villain, and I don't think it's important to raise the questions of why does the who was that? The Prime Minister or whatever? It was that, I forget what his title is, but the head guy of the USSR, like that guy was speaking for Drago in the press conferences, or was that just his promoter? Or like I don't remember who they.
Yeah,
I feel like he was one of a large political figure because he was up in that like box at the end of the movie, and everyone's kind of like under him on that panel of bigwigs up there.
Yeah, his character. All his character name is Nikolai Koloff, and it doesn't indicate really. I don't think like what his actual title is.
Yeah.
But yeah, he does seem to have some ties to like Russia's or the Soviet Union's like political system.
I don't think that it's important that someone explain why Dolph Lundgren doesn't talk so much and why Bridget Nielsen and that dude are doing all the talking for him. I mean, if anything, it's a way to incorporate more characters, and I think that there's some value added by having a little bit of mystery in the villain. Like, we talked about how Michael Myers is a successful slasher villain because of the mystery of never hearing him talk and being able to like clearly see his facial features and stuff like that. Like having a villain like that, they don't have to have several lines of dialogue to get the job done. And I mean, he has plenty of spotlight and limelight in this movie. Like, I mean, you obviously have two boxing matches worth of physical presence, and then some great stuff with the training montage and press conferences and stuff like that. Like, there's plenty of Ivan Drago to go around in this movie, to the point where you don't need him spouting off lines of dialogue. And furthermore, some of the dialogue that he has is like super quotable lines, like, if he dies, he dies, and I must break you. And I mean, those are great lines that are just little one-off things that have over the years been very quotable.
Yeah, I mean, like, he may not have that many lines, but I feel like he is heavily featured throughout this film, and you feel the presence from this guy regardless of how many lines he has. And that sort of speaks to just the physical nature of Dolph Lundgren at the time, who was, I think he was like 26 years old, had never been in a movie before. And I think that sort of, is somewhat of why he probably didn't have that many lines, because the guy had never been in a movie before. I think Bridget Nielsen was only in one, but she was probably a little bit more experienced, and giving other characters some more lines.
I also don't agree with the stuff about like him having to check in with each character, like, because he called it like part of being formulaic or whatever, being a formula. First of all, I think the formula in the first three works pretty well, so why not stick with it? And we've learned to love a lot of these characters, like Paulie and Adrian, and like, why would you not incorporate them in there? And Paulie's going to be living in their house, like mooching off of them the whole time. So of course he's going to be there, But I feel like all of that was important because it shows all of the things that Rocky had to lose. He was on top. He was the champ. And not only did he lose Apollo right at the beginning, which we'll get into, but like, he has all of that stuff, and they comment, he talks about how none of that stuff is important, and that his nature in fighting is he can't ignore it. He has to rise to the occasion and face Ivan Drago, because that's in his nature as a fighter. Like, he has to take on the challenge. And like, just to get into kind of the plot of this movie, like, at the very beginning, Ivan Drago is a threat to not just Rocky as being an up and comer. I think Ivan Drago had won he was an Olympic champion and an amateur champion, and making his break into the pro circuit or whatever, and is first introduced, and Apollo sees him as a threat. It's a foreign person from Russia of all places, and initially he looks at it as an opportunity to kind of prove something, both a statement of kind of his ego taking over and proving he's still got it, but then also kind of a USA versus Russia thing as well. And I don't know if that's kind of shoehorned in there. Kind of feels that way just because it's like, if you were retired and enjoying life and everything, I think. But at the same time, I do get that Apollo is hungry. He's a fighter too, just kind of like how Rocky talks about, and they justify that pretty well. That concept of having to keep fighting, but yeah, Apollo goes into the fight totally cocky and arrogant, does not take it seriously, hardly trains, makes it into a big show, and goes down, and his ego gets the best of him. They don't stop the fight. He makes Rocky promise not to stop the fight, and he loses his life for it. And that sets the stage of who this villain is. It's so important that Apollo dies in the beginning of this movie because it makes Ivan Drago the most dangerous and toughest, most badass, intimidating fighter that Rocky has yet to face, to the point where not even Adrian thinks he can do it, you know?
Yeah. Well, and also Rocky was the one that, you know, he ended up not throwing in the towel for Apollo, so he holds that guilt over his own head.
Right,
and it brings that much more weight to this whole, storyline. And I guess with Apollo, the whole thing is that, and I do feel like it's kind of shoehorned in there. The beginning of the movie is by far sort of the most clunkiest. But this whole thing's an exhibition match, and you know, it's going into this fight. It's not supposed to be, you know, that serious of a match. I guess, you know, it's not a title match or anything like that. It's just an exhibition match. And for me, I always thought this fight, like, I always found it hard to watch. Not that it's bad, but just knowing that Apollo dies in it is just something that I don't know. I just couldn't ever. I oftentimes just want to like look away for whatever reason. I'm not entirely sure why, but yeah, I just always found it hard to watch this fight, knowing, you know, that Apollo dies at the end of it.
Well, I think it's, you know, you look back at Rocky 3 when Rocky and Apollo really bond and become a team. Like, that's such a cool thing and very short-lived after you kind of see that just go away. You know what I mean? Like, that was such a great, like, breakthrough in the plot of the saga. You know what I mean? Like, what a cool thing. But yeah, it's awful because he goes into it not even the slightest concept that he could lose. Like, he's talking about knocking him out and that he's going down, and he dies. You know what I mean? Like, he gives his life. And I mean, that fight could have stopped. He knew he was going to get smoked. Like, he went down in the first round and got just like destroyed, but he asked for it. You know, he's even at the end when Rocky had the towel in his hand, I think there were spots in there where he was saying no, like, don't, you know what I mean? He was yelling it out, like everyone's yelling stop the fight, and you could hear Apollo saying no as he's getting like beat down. So it's just it is hard to watch. It's gruesome, and it's hard to see, like, it's hard to understand it too. And there's the James Brown factor as well.
Yeah.
So we'd be remiss to not mention the Living in America performance by James Brown that's in there. That's pretty outstanding, you know, to be just kind of thrown into a movie. You gotta love that, I guess, or not. But
I always loved. I mean, it's not as good when he fights Apollo, but just the Ivan Drago theme. You know, when he's coming out.
Oh yeah,
I thought that stuff's always great. But I do want to mention, how crazy is it that they included the death of Apollo Creed in the trailer?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I feel like that's super spoiler.
Like, if that came out today, like, people would be up in arms about that.
It'd be nuts. Yeah, I've noticed that with some of these older trailers, they're just really on the nose, and they show you the kind of the whole movie, or a lot of the good highlights are like thrown in there with like narration. It's like, that's that's not good. Like they make trailers very different now than they used to.
That's true. Yeah, the trailer for this movie, they let you know that Apollo dies and Rocky's going to Russia to fight Drago.
Maybe it's because you can't. Back then, you couldn't watch trailers over and over and over and over.
That's true. Yeah,
on YouTube like you can now. So now they have to be. People will digest them so much faster and want something additional much sooner, and so therefore it's probably best not to have too much content in there. Make things very vague and not disclose too many things that are going to give away the goods.
Yeah. But I mean, with this movie, I guess, how do you market it? You know, there's a fight sequence. Rocky's struggling with having to, you know, leave the people he loves to go fight this steroided Russian boxer. There is some limitations with this story. It's pretty basic. So I can see how
simple.
Yeah. And I do want to mention, though, this is like the shortest Rocky movie. This movie's only like 90 minutes.
Yeah.
This movie's a breeze to get through. The first Rocky movie's like 2 hours. Rocky 2's right in that ballpark. And Rocky 3, I think, is like an hour and 45.
Yep.
But even Rocky 5 is longer than this film. So yeah, it's by far the most like commercial Rocky movie. It's very streamlined, very basic. The script was, you know, it must be considerably shorter than the previous films. But yeah, I just wanted to put that out there as sort of a fun fact.
So like with Drago, Siskel talking about how good of a villain he is. I think it's important to kind of appreciate the way that they shot this movie, like their ability, because Stallone isn't really like a tall guy. I mean, he's really outweighed and in stature, he's way shorter than Drago. So like, I really have always appreciated like the way that they shot the fighting in this movie, you know, and in any Rocky movie, it's a lot of like shots that are clearly not landing on the guy's head, but they have to, you know, it's stunt work. But, you know, we have a clip, we're kind of getting into Stallone talking about how you go about shooting that and some of the efforts that they put into that.
How real were the fight scenes, and how much did you have to get into shape for those movies?
A lot. Yeah, because the as opposed to a fight, which is, you know, incredibly grueling, and you can, you know, face life and death. This fight will go on for months. So you're in the gym, and you have to be able to do scenes over and over and over and over again. So you'll be in the ring for maybe altogether 60, 70 hours, you know, and then you piece it down to like 15 minutes or 8 minutes. So I felt what set Rockies apart from other fighting films is the way the American public, or the world in general, perceives a fight, usually through television, and it's kind of a wide shot. Very rarely are you above anywhere near the ankles. You're wide, so you can see the movement and the ballet and you know, boxer against puncher. You start getting into this. That's I don't know what that is, but it's not boxing. It's now becomes like, we're supposed to see the pain, but the pain really is in the body language. You know, when you see someone who's truly connected in a wide shot, you go, oh, like, you know, the great Gotti fight with Mickey Ward. Right. If you were here, you wouldn't sense it. Right. You know, so you're just too close to the action. So that means, basically, it's a long-winded dissertation. You have to practice a great deal to be able to throw and not get caught. But
did you get hurt at all?
Oh man,
really?
Dolph Lundgren put me in the hospital for 9 days. 9 days.
That was Rocky 3.
Yeah. I was 9. Yeah. I knew I was in trouble when I showed up and nuns met you.
That's not a good sign.
It was an accident. It was I had seen the Hagler-Hearns fight, and I went, well, you know what? I gotta forget what we've been practicing now, Dolph. I want you to get out there and just try to clock me, knock me out. Just go for the first minute of the fight. It's going to be a free-for-all. I want it to be, because what I saw when Hagler and Hearns, two consummate professionals went crazy on each other. They just literally went nuts.
3 rounds.
And 3 rounds. They became not like amateurs, but like two truly brutal enemies. So I said, do the same thing. So he comes out there, and I'm like 5'10", he's like 6'12". Okay, he's beyond height. And he was also a world champion kickboxer, so he knows how to fight. And he's boom in the chest. And that night, I started feeling palpitations, and they said, "Oh my God!" And I went to the hospital. They put me on a low altitude flight, and then I had to go back to St. John's Hospital in California. 9 days later, Lloyd's of London were brought in. Oh, we know he's faking it. I said, "No, I don't want to hang out in ICU for 9 days. It's not my idea of a vacation." So they went through the film, and sure enough, and I don't know how fighters do not get hurt more often. It was an uppercut. Caught the ribs, which hit the heart against the rib cage, and it's a thing called a pericardial sac. He said you usually get this in head-on collisions. I said, well, close. Wow. I did hit a bus of sorts.
Oh, that's funny.
Wow. That's crazy.
I do like what he says about like how you film a boxing match, because you want it to feel sort of realistic. And I guess realistic in the sense of like how actual boxing matches are filmed. You know, like if you turn on the TV and watch a boxing match, there's never like close-ups. You know what I mean?
Right.
Everything is like at a wide angle, which it's what he's talking about. I think Creed changed that up. They do sort of like a in the ring handheld look. And I did like that, but I think I do prefer the more Rocky-esque boxing match filming.
They do a few different angles. You know, I mean, it's not like the TV would probably be like one stationary, one that's kind of one side or the other or whatever. But yeah, I thought it was crazy how much footage they shoot of it. And I like the idea of like having one sequence that's real. You know what I mean? Like pull as much as you can from that, and then some of the other stuff you'll get with editing.
Yeah, and I mean the fact that like 60 to 70 hours in the ring, that's a lot. And you know, like it's a testament to like how I guess, I don't know if dedicated is the word, but like you have an actor like Hugh Jackman who's portrayed Logan or Wolverine since 2000, but then you have Sylvester Stallone. It's been, what is it, 42 years since the original Rocky movie?
Yeah.
I mean, the guy's not, I mean, he probably gets in shape a little bit to, you know, to look somewhat fit, but and I think he's just generally fit.
But
regardless,
him in this movie though, he was so ripped.
Yeah, both of these guys, they're just like absurdly ripped. They're just these like ultimate human specimens that are just like dripped in baby oil and just like shredded.
It's wild to watch Rocky 1 and see Stallone's body in that one, and then look at Rocky 4. Like, he just really leaned out. But at the same time, the cool thing about that is that that's in the story. Like in Rocky 3, he kind of learns that like how to move around the ring and how to be a little bit quicker, and not to be walking around like, you know, like Apollo shows him how to fight and how to dance around the ring and leans him out and teaches him how to fight and have and kind of be the boxer that he was, the style that Apollo was, to make him better, a little bit of both worlds. So I love the fact that like it's in line with the story that his physique changes to look more like that. And I mean, he was just in great, you know, shape or whatever. Like you really got the feeling in the end when he goes to face Drago, and after the training the multiple training montages that you watch, like you just look at him and be like, damn, like he really did it, you know, like he's ready.
Yeah, chopping up wood and climbing up mountains.
So really awesome.
Really shreds you.
And we're going to get into some of that training montage and material. We're saving that for later. We'll get to it right after the break.
Audible is offering our listeners a free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. Just go to audibletrial.com/abominations and browse the unmatched selection of audio programs. Download a title free and start listening. It's that easy. Go to audible.com/abominations and get started today. All right, and we're back. We're going to be getting into an aspect of this movie that I think really sets it apart from the previous films, and that's the soundtrack. Now, there is quite a few, probably several great songs on this soundtrack that just brings in the flavor. Adam, you want to sort of give us a rundown of some of these tracks?
I do. Yeah. My favorite ones, at least, there's more than just these 5, but I kind of handpicked these out just based on, like, when I was watching the movie, I kind of was like, ooh, yeah, that was a good one. But Burning Heart by Survivor is a song that comes on, or they play it when Rocky's arriving in Russia on the plane. And, yeah, that's the one right there. Hearts on Fire by John Cafferty and the Beaver Brown Band. So, I mean, Hearts on Fire, just the title of the song, you know, you kind of know which song that is. It's in the second training montage in Russia. War by Vince DiCola. So Vince DiCola, he's got a couple of them on here. He did the main training montage as well. And then No Easy Way Out by Robert Tepper. Another great song. These songs together, I mean, this has to be maybe my favorite movie soundtrack. And when we're talking about soundtracks, I mean like movies that plug in music by artists, not just like composers, like not just a score, but an actual soundtrack. And this movie does it well by they plug them in at certain times, transitional times or montages, or, you know, ways to complement the movie the right way. And it also sprinkles in some of the old flavor of the original Rocky movies, obviously. This one was the first one up to this point that wasn't composed by Bill Conti. So Bill Conti did the original Rocky movie. I think they recorded that whole score for that movie in like 3.5 hours. Wow. Something ridiculous on a tight budget.
That's crazy.
And yeah, it's one of those movies where you know, you learn a little bit about it and you're like, just everything fell together perfectly, and it's just like an amazing thing, like the miracle of a movie, kind of the way that Halloween was for horror, like the way John Carpenter whipped that one up. This is actually the original Rocky's actually very kind of similar in that it had kind of a lower budget and such a great culmination of different things coming together. But God, this soundtrack is so good. I remember playing that, like, or I was working at one of my old jobs. I had that playing on the stereo CD, and somebody like asked me, like, what's that music you're listening to? I was like, oh, that's just the Rocky soundtrack, Rocky 4 soundtrack. And they're like, oh, I gotta get that.
Yeah,
you know, like
hell
they
yeah,
were just like they were just like super stoked about like, I know that, but I can't. He was like, I know that, but I can't quite place it. Like, what is that? And it just really works well. You were talking earlier about being a product of its time period. Like, these songs could have totally destroyed this movie, but instead they like elevated it. And I don't know if Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert appreciated them at the time because they were in the 80s and they were just surrounded by 80s music and all of that flavor that was going on, but these are just so perfect for this movie. Like, I feel like they create a tone and they create this like building epic storyline, and even the lyrics of some of the songs really cater to the plot of the movie. Like, no easy way out. Like, there's no easy way for him to get out of where he's going to face Ivan Drago. Like, he has to do the work and train hard, and I think maybe at that time too he's thinking like he can't just not fight him. I think that's when he's contemplating whether or not he wants to fight him or not. He's dealing with the grieving of Apollo's death and the pressure of everyone putting on him to fight Ivan Drago, and then goes home and talks to Adrian about it. And she says, you can't win.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you totally feel the weight on this guy's shoulders. You know, it's this sort of tug of war thing where, you know, his family doesn't want him to have anything to do with this fight. That's sort of been a consistent thing with Adrian in all of these movies. Is that's the one thing about her character that's sort of the core, is that, you know, she loves Rocky, but at the same time she hates what he does, but she knows he has to do it, and with the music and the story and the characters, it really feels like, I don't know, you feel just the tension and the weight of what this movie's building towards. And I feel with the end fight there, it really pays off. You know, the movie, you know, it's taking place in Russia at this point. Rocky's, you know, he's shacking it up with Paulie, and I don't remember his coach's name. It was originally Apollo's coach. Duke? Okay.
Duke.
Yeah, they're shacking it up in the middle of nowhere in Russia. And, you know, he's training the old-fashioned way with axes and climbing up mountains. And
freaking badass is what
it is. Yeah, it's just that whole montage is one of the greatest.
Well, like, back to Adrian, like, one of the coolest things about, I think it's Rocky 2, is I think they have a baby, right? And I don't think he was even gonna, I don't know if he was gonna fight or not, or I can't remember what his state of mind was, but she says, there's something you can do for me, and she says, win. And then it like begins the training montage of Rocky 2, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And you kind of get that again in this movie where she says you can't win. And that's the only time I feel like we've had that she doesn't want him to fight before, but I don't think she's ever said like, you're not going to win.
Right. Yeah.
And I think it really breaks him down in a way that's kind of similar to the way he broke down and didn't feel like he could win without Mick in Rocky 3, and kind of get some of that back by bringing in Apollo and Duke in Rocky 3 and beating Clubber Lang. And then he has to be broken down again with Apollo dying in Rocky 4 and Adrian telling him he can't win, and Paulie tells him stuff like that all the time.
Yeah.
But then we've got a great training montage. Initially, you talked about the cabin and him kind of doing some of that like rustic training. And then he gets back from running around and dragging sleds and rolling over logs and stuff like that. He comes home and Adrian's there waiting for him again. And she gives him that reassurance again, like she did in Rocky 2, and says, you know, I'm with you no matter what. You know, like she's just saying, like, I support your determination, and she understands that he's in it till the end, and she's there with him to support him. And I think that is a cool moment that's parallel to Rocky 2.
Yeah.
And then after that, then they give us another montage.
Right.
With Hearts on Fire by John Cafferty and the Beaver Brown Band. And I mean, that one is insane. You've got like super badass jump roping with dust floating in the air after each rope hits the floor, and you can just hear that thing whirling. And then he's hanging from the rafters or
and doing
the
sit-ups
up above. They're holding his legs, and he's doing inverted sit-ups, and his abs are just glistening. You know, in the light of the camp, the hearth or the fire in the log cabin. And then he also does these badass leg lifts where he's like holding his head and his legs are up in the air, and he lowers them down like almost horizontal and then back up. I mean, it's just awesome.
I have goosebumps
what a great song.
right now.
It's so good, man. It's so good.
Well, and I would like to say that one of the reasons I think it's so good is not only it's accompanied by this fantastic music piece by, you know, John Cafferty and the Beaver Brown Band.
Yeah, don't forget the Beaver Brown Band.
But the contrast between the way Rocky is training and the way Ivan Drago is training.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's rustic versus
Good
technology and steroids.
Yes.
And I just love that blend.
Yeah, it's really great. And even to the point where they're really drilling down to like the things that Rocky is doing in the snow and all of that is like the same. It's working the same body parts,
right? Yeah,
you know, as what Drago is doing. Whether like when he's climbing the mountain, they show Drago doing an inclined treadmill, and they keep cranking it up,
right?
You know, and I mean, and it builds and builds, and he loses the couple guys that are tailing him in the car, and he runs up the mountain, and then it just finally, like, climactically ends with him yelling Drago at the top of the mountain. Like, I'm coming after you. And I mean, that moment where he yells at the top of the mountain is, like, one of my favorite. That's maybe my favorite Rocky moment of all time. It's just so awesome. It's just so badass.
Yeah, it's probably one of the greatest moments in this movie. And it's
I feel like at that point you're like, he's gonna win, you know?
Yeah, it's so uplifting and motivating. Like you're just totally behind this guy, and going into this fight, you just want him to kick Drago's ass. But I do
absolutely.
I do sort of want to get into the character of Drago, and sort of like after rewatching this and all the training sequences and seeing them inject steroids into his shoulder, like I started to feel a little bit sympathy for Drago, and sort of viewing him as this sort of like experiment or like lab rat.
Right.
And I think that sort of plays into the end of the movie, sort of the tail end of the fight there, you know?
Yeah.
That's just something new I sort of caught while watching Rocky IV again.
Well, I liked the touch of when he says he wins for him.
Yeah.
You know, he's like saying, I win for me, or I think it helps bring together some of the more political statements they're trying to throw in there about kind of the everyone needing to change, like how he's kind of just a pawn in this larger scheme for the Soviets to defeat the Americans. You know, it's more like they're just using him as a tool to accomplish this invasion of this sport, and them being the champion on top, and he's feeling used. Whereas Rocky, I feel like he feels like he's an individual who's free to, he individually on his own achieved his championship. So it's a different perspective with Drago, and Drago sees that as like, I feel like he probably envies Rocky, and especially after the Soviets start chanting for Rocky, he abandons his Soviet leaders that are sponsoring him, and he says like, this is for me. I don't care about you guys, the political guys, and I don't care about the fans. Like, this is for me. And I mean, I think that's probably where the sympathy kind of stems from, is like, you feel like he's worked hard to be there as well, but he's more or less just a Frankenstein of a guy, and nobody really cares. They just want the Soviet Union to win. They don't really care if Ivan Drago wins.
Yeah, he's just sort of a pawn in this larger scheme, and everything's kind of being manipulated around him beyond his control.
Yeah. And he's got some, like I said earlier, he's got some pretty cool lines. Like, I couldn't believe it when he had the cojones to say, if he dies, he dies. Like, Apollo's laying there, like, convulsing on the ground, like, dying. And he's just sitting there saying, like, I want to fight the champion. You know, if he dies, he dies. Like, I feel like he should go to jail. If you fight someone and beat them to death in a ring, even if it's in sport, if after the fact you're just like, it's okay if he dies, really? Like, he should be in jail.
Right. Yeah, and I'm actually really curious to how all this is sort of going to play into Creed 2 with the Dragos. I think there's some,
I hope it's not terrible.
I know, but I think there's some real exploration that they can do with all that. And, how did, Drago's career sort of turn after that defeat from Rocky? You know, I think there's some really cool stuff they could do with that. So we'll just have to wait and see.
What did you think, just to wrap up kind of the movie itself, like as far as the speech at the end, like after he defeats him, how'd you feel about like the whole end where Rocky says, throughout the match, I feel like there was a lot of change in the way I felt about you, or the way you felt about me, the way I felt about you. And I feel like if we could all change, then blah, blah, blah. Like, I feel like that worked pretty well, but I feel like the way it was written was cool. Like it worked with Rocky's vocabulary and his demeanor and the way he talked.
Yeah.
Like, I believe that, and I mean, you're not going to do Yo Adrian again.
Yeah.
But I just don't know about the way that the Russians started chanting for Rocky. Like, just kind of, I just don't see that would ever happen.
No, I agree. It does feel sort of odd.
I mean, I think people like an underdog, but I don't think that, when you're at war, it's basically the end of the Civil War. Like, that just seems like a super convenient thing. So, like, I could understand if people were just like saw something like that and they're like, this is silly, I could get that. That's kind of a moment for me that took me out of the movie, where I just thought it was a little bit too convenient, a little too Hollywood. But I know that there was, the intention was to make a good positive statement, and I think that's always an admirable quality to have in a movie, especially if it leaves you feeling so good. Like, this movie just it gives you a lot of good motivational kind of feelings. So to cap it off with something like that could be related to real life and the real world that we were living in at that time, like, that would be very cool. I would hope that people that saw it in Russia and the Soviet Union would feel like they, had positive feelings related to it as well. But I feel like this is more of a movie for Americans than a movie for Russians, for sure. I mean,
yeah, I would be curious to see how this was received in Russia at the time when it came out. That'd be kind of funny to learn about.
They probably despise it or something. They probably think it's garbage. Who knows?
Yeah. Hey, but they're no longer under the Soviet Union control.
Right.
So after 91, they were freed.
Yeah. Hasselhoff took them down.
That's right, man. Hasselhoff ended the Cold War, ended the Soviet Union single-handedly, along with Rocky IV.
So one thing I wanted to touch on is, just to kind of get this wrapped up. I mean, I think we've dissected Rocky IV. We both seem to be quite fond of it, but the question kind of remains, where does this Rocky rank amongst all of the other Rockies? Like, what is your list?
I would say this one is number one. I don't think it's the best movie, too, but I think it has the most rewatchability, at least for me. Yeah. I think it's the most fun. It's the most outrageous. I love the music in it, the sort of 80s atmosphere that it really, it really holds on to. And I don't know. I find myself coming back to this one more than the other ones. I guess after that, it would probably be like the original Rocky. And I think that's probably the best movie. It's just a great like character piece of Rocky.
Right.
I believe it won Best Picture of 1976.
Yeah, it won 3 Oscars.
Wow, that's incredible. And then after that, I would put Rocky 3. I really love Rocky 3 too, especially you got Hulk Hogan in there as Thunder Lips. Man, that's great stuff.
Thunder Lips, yeah.
I'd put Rocky 2 after that.
Yeah.
I'd put Creed after that, so Creed would be the number 5. I think that's an incredible movie. It's just I have a little bit more favoritism to the other Rocky movies. But I can't even remember if I even finished Rocky 5. But then you have Rocky Balboa, and I don't even remember that movie. So I'll put Rocky 5 at the end, and then Rocky Balboa right before that one.
So above that, that's
my list.
That's a safe play. Mine's pretty much the same. I like 4 the best. I would probably put 1 and 2 together. I always kind of look at those movies like they're like part 1 and part 2. It's like Karate Kid part 1 and 2 for me.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. But I just don't know if I could split them up, because I love the first one, like the love story of it all. But then I love Rocky 2 because he finally wins. You know what I mean? Like in Rocky 1, he doesn't win. It's like a draw, and the draw goes to the champion. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
and he clearly lost like the count of how many punches were landed and all that. But I love that in Rocky 2 how he wins. But 3's great, with the Clubber Lang, Mr. T stuff in there. Rocky 5 is a straight up abomination. And there are many movies that we've covered, and what we like to do on the podcast is we like to cover movies that maybe critically panned or not necessarily well reviewed, but that we can find some sort of positive light or nostalgia or something about it. I think there's been a couple we've done just because they were bad, but I don't have any interest in going anywhere near Rocky 5. That movie, I have a Blu-ray like collection version of Rocky, the complete collection.
Yeah.
And I feel really compelled to take Rocky 5 out of there and just like destroy it and just make it so it doesn't exist.
Right.
I do not like that movie. And the interesting thing about that, for me at least, is that it was directed by the same director, John Avildsen, who did the original Rocky.
Really?
That won, I think he won an Oscar for Best Director for Rocky, I believe.
What happened?
And he did Rocky 5. And Stallone did 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah.
So what about 5 just
crapped the bed?
I don't know if it's plot or if it's Tommy Morrison as Tommy Gunn or whatever. Like, yeah, that was bad, but man, 5 is a stinker, and that's why I was laughing when Ebert was talking about we didn't ask for Rocky 5. I was like, hallelujah, amen, brother. But
jeez.
But yeah, I'd probably say otherwise my list, I would say Creed would be up there right after. So I'd go Rocky 4, Rocky 1 and 2, Rocky 3. And 3 is close. Like 3 is really close to be. I might even go Rocky 4, Rocky 1, Rocky 3, Rocky 2, Creed, Rocky Balboa, then Rocky 5.
Right. Yeah. Rocky 4, man. It has a clunky first act, but I mean, once it gets rolling, man, does it get rolling in all the best ways.
I want to give a shout out to a couple different scenes real quick. Duke, played by Tony Burton, who was Apollo's trainer. That guy in this movie, Rocky 4, is amazing.
Yeah.
He has a couple scenes in there. One of them is in the cabin. He comes up and he's like, you know what you have to do? Do it. And he is so intense and laser focused, and that his performance, he's very good for such a small role. That guy is amazing. And I love the no pain. He says how he says no pain.
Right.
I love that. Like that's a one-liner that you can use in real life all the time. Like it's so awesome. And then the other thing was Paulie, played by Burt Young. We gotta shout out to Paulie. Paulie had a funny scene when Rocky's getting ready for the fight. He kind of like breaks down and starts crying and telling him that if he could be anyone else, he'd want to be him, and he loves him and all that. And then they're walking out to the fight. Rocky's getting ready to go out to the ring, and Paulie's like, yeah, forget all that other stuff I said earlier. Like he doesn't want to be him anymore because he's got to go fight Ivan Drago. So that was a pretty funny line. That's classic Paulie there.
I want to shout out a scene with Pauly real quick.
What's it? Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's right when they get to the cabin in Russia, and he falls into the snow.
Oh yeah,
I just thought I was cracking up while watching that this past time. So
and he was bitching about how there wasn't even any antennas on top of the cabin.
Yes. Oh, it's great. He's a character that gets sort of.
He's like, how we gonna watch the Rose Bowl?
Right. Yeah. He's.
What about his robot at the beginning of the movie?
Oh yeah, it's I forgot its name. It's a guy at first, and then he changes the voice to a female, and there's this sort of like romantic flair going on between them. This sexual tension. And it's great. I mean, he's a character that doesn't have much to do, but what he does with what he's given, he adds a lot to the movies. Some of that comedic humor, and I don't know. I love the character of Pauly.
Yeah, Burt Young. He was popular back then too. He did Amityville Horror. That was a really popular horror movie. I like him. I think he's a character that like just really adds a lot of that comic relief. You're just kind of taking, especially in the earlier movies, like Rocky 1 is such a slow burn of a movie, and Pauly just adds in a lot of good flavor as far as comedy and contrast of personality and that kind of thing. Rocky and Adrian in the first movie are very dull as far, it would be a very different movie if you pull Pauly out of there. He adds a little color. So really appreciate him being one of the parts of the formula that Siskel and Ebert were talking about. We like the formula up until Rocky 5. And maybe that's why Rocky 5 didn't work. Maybe they abandoned the formula. I don't know. One thing that I noticed with Rocky 4, I believe this is the case, so if I'm not mistaken, but I think they go first round, second round, montage, and then end of the fight. And that's the same thing that happens in Rocky 1, is first round, second round, montage, and then the end of the fight.
Oh.
So, and it's usually like the opponent wins the first round, then Rocky kind of makes his surge, and then they go back and forth in the montage, and then the very end they're like trading blows until both of them are almost falling down,
Yeah.
But that's the equation. That's the formula for how to shoot a successful boxing match on one of the Rocky movies.
Yeah.
But you better have a damn good montage with some good synthesizers.
Yeah, I mean, I think Rocky 4 is one of the kings of montage. I mean, Scarface gives it a run for its money. And I mean, that might even, that could even, I guess you could argue, is the king of montages. But in my mind, Rocky 4 is, the ultimate film with montages. It's not just how many montages you have, it's the quality of each montage,
Yeah.
It's really an art form.
Yeah, you got to have a montage.
Yeah, even Team America World Police, they were essentially making fun of Rocky 4 and a couple other 80s movies with that whole montage parody. But I think we can wrap this episode up here. I think we covered Rocky 4 in great detail, and we hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Next week, we haven't decided on a movie yet, but we'll announce it on social media, whether it's our Twitter or Instagram. Make sure to follow us at Abominations Pod, either on Twitter or Instagram. We're on Facebook as well, so check us out. But Adam, any final thoughts or comments?
Well, I'd say let's have some of the listeners, if you'd like, shoot us some ideas for what movies you'd like to have us do. I mean, I don't think we've done that yet. We'll try to take a few samples and see if we can check them out in time for next week. But we've done a few things where we've thrown around some and put up some polls and had some votes and that kind of thing. But feel free to shoot us some ideas on Twitter, and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah. And you can always call in at 616-594-0764 or just email us at abominationspod@gmail.com. And for Adam and myself, we'll see you next week.